From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A former state lawmaker on trial charged with lying to get COVID relief funds. Plus, moving forward with a plan for medical marijuana in Kansas. But first, if you're hitting the highway this holiday season, you may notice fewer state troopers on your trip. Why? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. The Kansas Highway Patrol is down dozens of positions, and it says it's a problem that's hitting everyone, including other law enforcement agencies. KSN's Samantha Boring shows us why.
The KHP needs about 500 troopers to be fully staffed. They're down about 75 right now. That's leaving less time to cover all duties, whether that be enforcement or assisting other agencies. If you're hitting the road anytime soon, you might notice not as many state troopers on patrol.
We're over 400 right now. We definitely would love to be getting those numbers back up because that does leave a lot of vacancies in several counties across the state.
Without the needed staff, troopers aren't always able to enforce traffic laws, especially if there are more crashes on the roads.
The less of us that are being seen out on the roadway, the more traffic violations that are going to be happening out there.
The KHP isn't just working for the state, but also helping smaller agencies like the Sherman County Sheriff's Office.
We work together quite a lot.
The Sherman County Sheriff's Office is also down employees, needing a deputy and an undersheriff.
I wish I had 4 more deputies. That way I could cover things better, but I just can't afford that for the population we have.
But if a state trooper is unable to respond in that area, it can cause delayed response times.
Out here in the rural area, we have to rely on each other. A lot of times one trooper will be out, and if he needs backup, we're there. And then if we need backup, they're coming back us up.
The July 1st 30% pay increase has boosted applications, but there are still troopers needed mainly in metro areas such as Wichita and Salina. The staffing issue has been going on for about 4 years. Another issue to this shortage is some troopers retiring and others leaving to take a different job or move to a different field. The KHP will soon be opening its application for its March training that will take about 24 weeks, and we'll have more information on ksn.com if you're interested. Here for you in Wichita, Samantha Boring, KSN News 3.
And joining us this week on the desk, we've got Dr. Russell Arbin Fox, political analyst from Friends University, and State Representatives Nick Hoheisel and Casey O'Hibasum, a Wichita Republican and Democrat, respectively. Thank you all for joining me. And I guess not really much of a surprise what's going on with the KHP. We've seen the same thing with police departments, sheriff's offices, Department of Corrections.
Mental health.
Mental health.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be endemic right now.
Yeah, I think the issue with the Kansas Highway Patrol, though, it goes back to a broader problem of leadership within the Kansas Highway Patrol. I just seen today we had a 7th highway patrolman resign this month. That's 7. Our last graduating class, I believe, had 5 highway patrolmen graduate, and that class is, as they said, a 24-week class. So we've already lost in the month of December more people than we graduated in the last class that took 24 weeks to cover. We have a problem at the top. We need leadership at the top. And, we have folks out there calling for the governor to make a change. If the governor doesn't make a change, if she doesn't act, the legislator will.
And this is turning into something of a party argument here.
Well, that is correct. I mean, from what Representative Hoheisel has said, it looks like it's becoming like a party, argument. When it comes to law enforcement should be neutral. I mean, this is something that, we go back decades as to being neutral. I think that the problem pretty much, we both sit on transportation together. Kansas Highway Patrol, they always come to our committees, they brief us as to what's going on. One of the things that they do emphasize is pretty much, mental health funding of current employees. So I think that's an issue that we need to look at, the legislature needs to look at as to addressing it. Of course, you talk about leadership, take a look at what happened before the current leadership was in place, prior to coming in, all the scandals that happened. It takes a lot, in regards to the law enforcement, and on that position. So I think it's more we need to address it as we address the correction officers issues, when they have problems in the prisons. We need to address the same thing when it comes to the Kansas Highway Patrol.
Now, If I can kind of add to that, though, the scandals that were happening years ago before our time, or at least my time in the legislature, they're continuing. The Highway Patrol Superintendent, I saw a quote the other day, he's been involved in more court cases than Clarence Thomas. So, I mean, this is continuing. There's always outstanding litigation, and at some point, we're going to have to make a change at some point, because this is a public safety issue. I think the state of Kansas is 5th in highway miles in the country. So our Kansas Highway Patrol, they cover a lot of miles, and at the end of the day, it's a principle of safety, and we're going to have to make a change at some point.
You're talking about a lot of miles being covered, and obviously, that was pointed out by the sheriff, who was, referring to the difficulty of covering all of the territory, and yet the numbers, as they reported it, seem to indicate that the problems are concentrated in the cities. The problems are the real lack of officers who can serve in urban areas like Wichita. I mean, you guys are getting the reports from the KHP. I mean, what's your sense of why you've got that particular breakdown there?
I'm not sure. I know, especially in areas like Wichita, and where we have the Sedgwick County Sheriffs, we have WPD, and then we have Highway Patrol, all fighting over the same pool of workers. So it's constant. It's the same battle we fight on the state with El Dorado Prison and Sedgwick County Jail. We raise our starting pay at El Dorado Prison. Sedgwick County just counters raises theirs. So we have to go back and raise ours again because we're fighting over the same pool of employees. So I think that would be part of it. In some of these small towns, the sheriffs, the local police departments don't require as much manpower as the city of Wichita or WPD or the Sedgwick County Sheriff.
And Representative Hoheisel, you're absolutely correct. I think it is more of a funding issue at the Kansas Highway Patrol. We need to address it just like we addressed the Kansas corrections officers in terms of increasing pay and better benefits for these people to attract more employees to the workforce. So I'm looking forward. I know both of us are going to be on transportation. I hope.
Yeah.
I hope so. That's something that we can take a look at next session.
Absolutely. Definitely will be a discussion.
Well, in other news, after months of meetings, compiling data, and listening to research, state lawmakers say they're ready to take another stab at legalizing medical marijuana. Senator Rob Olson, chair of the Interim Committee on Medical Marijuana, told the Kansas Reflector he plans to introduce a bill at the beginning of this coming session, but he's not going to go the normal route. He says getting marijuana legislation through the committee system would be too difficult, and since they've basically already done the committee work between sessions, he wants to create a bill himself and then get other senators to start signing off on it as co-sponsors. Despite surveys like Kansas Speaks showing more than 2/3 of Kansans support legalization, lawmakers have struggled with the how. Law enforcement has generally opposed the idea, and the Reflector reports during last Friday's committee meeting, several members of the audience wore stickers reading "Kansas says no" to register their disapproval. The Kansas House approved a medical marijuana bill last year, but it didn't make it through the Senate. Senate President Ty Masterson says the state's budget and school funding legislation are a higher priority to him than medical marijuana. And Nick, you're on this committee. What can you tell us about the chances of any legislation moving forward, whether it goes the traditional route or this alternative route Senator Olson is talking about?
That's to be seen. I would say that the likelihood is better now than it's ever been in the state of Kansas. We had several productive committee hearings over the last few months on this topic. We heard from a lot of stakeholders. We heard from doctors. We've heard from law enforcement. And the general tone has shifted from adamantly opposed to we're still opposed, but we understand at some point this is going to happen. So let us help you guys put guardrails and fix some of the holes in the bill that we passed out of the House last year.
Okay.
Let me jump in real quick. I like how you put that there's been this move from, strong opposition to a recognition that this is going to happen. How much would you say the Missouri vote was crucial to that particular kind of shift?
I don't think it was a major thought in the minds of folks who came from opposed to oppose, but understand. I think it's more of just the general feeling, the polling that has showed that the general public in Kansas wants some kind of medical marijuana program. I think it's more of that, and folks in the Capitol, they're pragmatists. They understand how this process works, and I think the fact that we got a bill out of the House last year really set the alarm bells off in their head, like, hey, this is going to happen. They're already halfway there. So let us jump on board now. Let us give our input on things we would like to see in this. And I'll be honest with you, the bill we passed last year, it was flawed. There were a lot of holes in it, and a lot of folks have came forward, and we've been able to have recommendations on how to plug those holes in this bill.
Well, and if the Senate decides to kind of block it at the leadership level, as your party has proven many times when it comes to Medicaid expansion debates, there are ways around that.
Well, that is correct, and also just wanted to echo what Representative Hoheisel said. Yes, the bill that came out last year on medical marijuana did have some problems, but at least it is a step in the right direction. That, hey, look, our colleagues in the Senate are seeing this as, that, hey, we need to do something because the general sense, among Kansas people, like, we want to get something done with respect to medical marijuana. And I just have to add that, when we talked about there were some people who were opposed to it. Now, all of a sudden, there's a kind of a gradual shift per se. This argument started, my colleague, Representative Gail Finney, she was the one that first pushed this. And people thought she was crazy, and now look at we're about to pass it. So
she brought it up, what, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah. So I'm very excited what with the committee you guys are working on. I know you guys work very hard on it, and I do anticipate that a good bill will come to the House with the corrections that have been proposed, and I believe that the Senate has talked about, well, there's the other priorities, but if you take a look at the legislature, I mean, there are several days that we didn't do nothing, per se, so we can at least get some productive bills, and both in the House and the Senate debated. So I just want to close on that. I don't want to get in trouble.
All right, staying out of trouble for you guys. Did you know criminals don't have to last forever? There's a way to get them cleared off your record. It's called expungement, and it may get easier this next year. Unless we're talking homicide or child abuse, state law allows Kansans to expunge their records after paying all penalties and court costs. That could be a year or a decade afterward, depending on the crime. But the Kansas News Service reports that last variable can be a stopping point for many eligible Kansans. They just can't afford it. Last session, the Kansas House Judiciary passed out a bill that would have prevented outstanding costs from denying someone an expungement. It never came up for a vote on the House floor. Expungement costs almost $200 per offense after paying off fines and court fees. So if someone's struggling with that, it may be completely out of reach. Criminal charges on one's record are often flagged during job interviews and cost many foreign convicts chances at employment. Without steady pay, they can't pay off those fines and court fees.
When it's expunged, it's like it never happened. You can say at that point on a job application, you were not a felon, right? Because it's been totally wiped out.
Representative Stephen Owens serves on both the Judiciary and Criminal Justice Reform Committees. He supports another go at reforming Kansas expungement rules.
As you've heard me say before, I believe in this idea of redemption, that when somebody has paid their debt to society for their wrongs and they have made the strides to change their lives, we need to do everything we can to help them reintegrate into society. And expungement's a very important part of that.
The two main ideas Owens supports are, one, making some charges automatically expunged after a certain length of time if no further crimes are committed, and two, making some sort of fee waiver available for the costs of expungement. And looking at the cost question, certainly we know that those who can afford it get it done. We've seen this in the national headlines there, Russell.
The fact that this is something that's being taken up seriously by both Democrats and Republicans in Topeka is one of the most hopeful things I think that we can have in front of us when we take a look at 2023. Over the past 10 years, maybe about the last 15 years, you have seen across the United States activists, again, both Democrats and Republicans, really waking up to the enormous costs, the costs in terms of inability to find housing, the inability to apply for jobs, that people who are dealing with these records are struggling through. And you've had a variety of different approaches to it in different municipalities and different states. No doubt what Kansas comes up with is going to look different from what exists in some of our surrounding states, but simply the fact that people are aware of this and taking this seriously is a major achievement in terms of social justice and, in particular, racial justice within the state.
And this is part of a series of moves we've seen out of the state legislature the last few years to reduce recidivism.
That is correct. And I just wanted to, follow what Dr. Fox has just said. This is something that has, a bill that's actually needed, and, for my constituents, people who are having trouble finding housing and work and employment. I think that, on Judiciary Committee, we passed it out, the Judiciary, but due to schedule, it didn't actually get to the floor. I'm very hopeful that Chairman Patton will bring it up again next session, and we'll talk about it and get something on, and of course find a way to actually make it easier for people to get their records who actually have pay their debt, just as Representative Owens said, pay their debt and actually get back to living their normal lives.
And you talked about Patton maybe getting it pushed through to the floor again. I know last year there were no naysayers on this bill.
Yeah, Casey, Representative Harbison, and I both serve on House Judiciary, so we both had a hand in working on this legislation. Yeah, there was no opponent testimony. Law enforcement seemed on board. And as Dr. Fox has pointed out, this is such a bipartisan issue when you have folks like the ACLU on the left and Koch Industries on the right and Americans for Prosperity working together for criminal justice reform. It's a great thing, and that's how we really get the ball moving, when all sides come together and agree on an actual issue. And hopefully we get it past this year.
It's really been remarkable to see how the conversation has changed about criminal justice, the way a lot of people, conservatives as well as liberals, have woken up to just the dollars and cents that are attached to the consequences of a criminal justice system that's set up the way it did. I mean, there's been dozens, hundreds of examples of people who are confronted by activists who all of a sudden are like, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't aware that we were talking about these kinds of long-range effects. That has an explanation in terms of employment, in terms of housing. And so, yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I think that we can look forward to very positively this year.
And at the end of the day, when we're having such, as we talked about earlier, such a workforce shortage issue, excluding people from the workforce for past convictions 10, 15 years ago does nothing to help us with that workforce. So.
All right. Well, a former Kansas lawmaker went to trial this week on charges he lied repeatedly to get pandemic relief funds designed to help struggling small businesses. Former state representative Michael Capps faces 18 charges of fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering for the PPP and EIDL loans he got for 3 businesses under his name during the pandemic, as well as CARES Act grant monies he got from Sedgwick County. The federal government says he lied about the number of employees at each of the 3 businesses, average monthly payrolls, and gross revenues. The defense told jurors during opening statements evidence will show the FBI didn't try to talk to Capps. The investigation stemmed from a newspaper report, not a complaint from a bank or financial institution, and that Capps told a Wichita bank worker the application form wasn't accurate for his business, but she told him to fill it out anyway. The prosecution rested its case Thursday, and Michael Capps took the stand in his own defense. That testimony resumes on Monday. Now, one interesting point, I've been in court every day for this trial, was when the FBI agent who was in charge of the investigation took the stand. Capps's attorneys have been making a big deal about the fact that it was a newspaper article that spurred the investigation. The FBI agent said, yeah, I read the article and we're not blind to what's in the newspaper. It said, maybe we should look into this. But when he did, he found that the Sedgwick County DA's office already had an ongoing investigation that had been spurred by a complaint elsewhere. He did not go into any more detail. To me, that was a very kind of telling moment.
I find it fascinating that, we have different agencies responding to different complaints, following different paths, but all of them are ultimately revolving around Capps. I had a conversation with a friend the other day talking about this issue, and he brought up this is going to be an old reference, but he brought up the movie The Untouchables with Kevin Costner and Robert De Niro, and how in the end they got Al Capone for tax fraud instead of all these other things. And my friend was kind of like, well, you're just going to have people struggling to find some way to actually connect this man with all of the scummy things that we know that he's done. Now, I'm quoting my friend, obviously, innocent until proven guilty,
That's right.
but still, it would not surprise me to find out that different law enforcement agencies or different legal teams are all of a sudden discovering, oh, is this the approach you're taking? Well, we're taking this approach. One of us will get there eventually.
And this is certainly a case that has generated a lot of interest. How closely would you say state lawmakers are following this, considering it's a former colleague?
Well, I'll say that all of us are following it. Of course, he is a former colleague. He served in the House. He served in the legislature, so he's a former colleague of ours. But I just want to land on this point that regardless of what your position is, Representative Capps is. The presumption of innocence applies.
Yes.
He's in until proven guilty, and I know we both sit on judiciary, so we both do. Yeah. So that presumption of innocence applies to him all the way. So until proven.
And I do want to make one quick comment is. While Capps did take the stand on Thursday, he really only had about an hour or so, and he spoke mostly about his job history going back to high school. We really have not gotten to the meat of his testimony in his own defense. So when I say that there was a telling moment on the prosecution side, I fully expect there will be a telling moment on the defense side. There usually is in any trial.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of politicians following your thread on Twitter. And I'll just say this. I don't want to comment on this case because it is still an ongoing trial and the jury hasn't received it yet and there's been no adjudication either way. But anybody that is convicted of fraud, of PPP loans, of CARES loans, anything like that, if convicted, they should be sentenced to the most extreme sentence that there can be.
All right.
So.
Well, then we're going to leave that one there and move on. Finally today, the elections may have ended in November, but not everything was decided then. We have a couple of mop-up appointments, let's call them, to tell you about this week. Following embattled Senator Gene Sullentrop's announced resignation over a DUI jail and probation sentence, Sedgwick County Republicans this week picked a new senator to represent the western part of the county, Chase Blasey. Blasey won a majority of the votes among county precinct leaders over former Sedgwick County Commissioner Carl Peterjohn. Blasey has spent the last several years working in the Senate President's office, first for Susan Wagle, then Ty Masterson, until he left for a job with Evergy earlier this year. Blasey began his political career while still in high school when he won election to the Colwich City Council. Meanwhile, one of 3 Republican candidates for Attorney General may have lost the primary, but he'll now serve as the state's new KBI director. Chris Kobach says he's picked his former rival, Tony Mattivi, for the job. The Kansas Senate will have to confirm that choice. Kobach cited Mattivi's experience as a federal prosecutor, including his work on the USS Cole bombing in 2000 and the Garden City bomb plot in 2016. A couple of pretty interesting appointments and elections there. Kobach appointing Mattivi I find to be fascinating and perhaps a little telling as far as what we can expect from Attorney General Kobach.
That is correct. I mean, well, first of all, I did not vote for Chris Kobach, but I think this was a great pick. I mean, I saw the debates on the Republican side, and it does appear that he came out to be very knowledgeable. He was a former federal prosecutor. He knows his stuff, and I think it was an excellent pick by Chris Kobach. So yeah, of course, in politics, whenever there's a primary, of course, they're not always your enemies. I mean, after things are over, some people might become your friends, and so that's become your friend.
I echo that. I think this was a very wise pick from the incoming Attorney General. Tony Mattivi is immensely qualified for this position. He'll do a damn good job, and we're off to a good start.
And the Senate has to. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a smart pick, both in terms of Mattivi's obvious qualifications, but it's a smart pick because of the larger political reality that was around there. Now, there is no indication that Mattivi is going to approach, the issues that will land on his desk, to the extent that they relate to ongoing political issues. There's no reason to assume that he would respond to it any way differently from the way Chris Kobach would. Their politics, their political beliefs are probably quite similar. But what was distinctive was the way that they talked about approaching those political questions. Mativi, during the primary, really tried to distinguish himself from Chris Kobach. Tried to present himself as somebody who wasn't going to be caught up in culture war fights the way presumably Chris Kobach would. Now, are we going to see any kind of change in Chris Kobach? Are we going to see, any of this, kind of playing out? We don't know. But the fact that you see Chris Kobach reaching out to Mativi in spite of this kind of positioning that took place is at least, worth commenting on. It suggests a response to political perceptions that are worth kind of building upon, I think.
Okay, I want to turn to the state's newest state-level senator. Quick point of transparency here. I have known Chase since before he was a city council member in Colwich. I was his high school Spanish teacher, so I have known him a long time. I've watched him grow up. And I've got to say, as somebody who's been watching him for years, this is not a surprise.
Absolutely not. I've known Chase a little before my time in the legislature. When I was elected, he's obviously the chief of staff for Susan Wagle and then Senate President Masterson. Chase is a great guy. He's going to do a great job. It was a very wise pick for the folks in Northwest Wichita. I'm excited for him, and I'm excited that we have another younger Republican voice in Topeka.
I'll just add, I mean, I think it was a great pick, for the northwest part of Sutter County. Yeah. Chase is a good guy. I've worked with him, for years now, and I think he's going to bring a lot of energy to the Senate, and good luck to him.
Definitely,
definitely.
He's well versed in Senate proceedings as it is.
I was going to say a lot of energy, but also a lot of experience. Maybe not as a senator, but working in the Senate President's office for so many years certainly gives him a huge advantage walking in.
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to hear the praise that both of you have for him because he's going to be my state senator. I mean, I'll be open about it.
Did you vote in the precinct election, or they didn't
no,
let you?
I did not. And I'm really, really happy that it's not going to be Gene. So, I think that, bringing young people into politics, giving them the opportunity to, let their ambitions and let their drive and let their creativity, kind of fertilize all of the other discussions going on around them. I think it's a great thing.
And Professor, I would encourage you to reach out and get a cup of coffee with your new state senator.
Maybe I'll.
And I just hope that he will be a Chiefs fan, by the way. So
I think you're going to win on that one.
Yep.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Pilar.
Casey, Nick, Russell, for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed our discussion as well. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle. We'd love to hear your ideas for future episodes, topics, or even possible guests. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.